My name is Ben Fama Jr. I'm a student documentary filmmaker. I'm making a film called A Virus Called Fear. And briefly, I was wondering if you can give me an input on how we went from having rational fear to like not get eaten by tigers and bears, and how we came to irrational fears like politics and religion.
Okay, that's a very interesting thought.
Hey, I'm Ben. I got less than 20 minutes to talk about a program that has taken thousands of years to try to understand. That has taken the most of my adult life to understand. And it continues to spread through our system. Few of us actually ask, what is fear?
A lot of psychologists and researchers believe that fear is an innate emotion. It's believed that we are born with the ability to be afraid because it's a survival mechanism. If we did not have fear, we would not then get into a reaction to fear, which is something that is within us to survive, to be able to properly prepare ourselves for anything that's a danger.
I think fear is a survival mechanism, certainly. Fear has adaptive qualities for us over time. We needed to be afraid of things in order to survive. So the basic fears like fear of lightning, fear of fire, fear of heights, fear of danger, fear of the saber-toothed tiger, all of those were quite functional for us. And then over time, when there was not that need to be afraid of those things because we were living in more industrialized societies, we seemed to be afraid of other things, mainly other people.
Certainly, fear would be a very valuable biological mechanism because our ancestors would have lived perilous lives. They'd have been frightened of predators, lions, saber-tooths, no, probably not saber-tooths, and leopards. They would have had disease would have swooped without warning, without explanation, so they would naturally have tried to think of ways to avoid these terrible dangers. In the case of disease, which before modern science was completely unpredictable, unknowable, one would naturally fall into superstitious habits. These are superstitious responses, and when you're living in a world of ignorance.
So it's not surprising that people will go to incredible lengths to survive. If you think back to, caveman days, hearing noises, fear for your life, are you in danger of any kind? That there are fears that are actually just natural, innate, that are there to kick in the fight or flight response so that we are on guard. We're prepared for something that may be something we need to either avoid, something we need to get away from, escape from, in order to keep ourselves alive, keep ourselves safe. That type of an innate fear is going to be very different from fears that are learned.
Our survival fears, when you look at evolutionary psychology, what we needed to be afraid of in order to survive. And I can't say that that's had adaptive qualities, but a sociologist would probably say that it's been functional. It sounds a little bit odd to think that fear could be functional, but in actuality, if you look at in-groups and out-groups in society, the us versus them, it's actually quite functional to be afraid of them.
Certainly a lot of fears that it is believed are learned along the way or conditioned, depending on the school of psychology that you believe. But then there's also a lot of research to show that there are innate fears that we are born with that are there to protect us, that we need those natural reactions in order to be prepared, be on guard, and survive threats. Watson wanted to look at, could someone learn to be afraid of something? You had this young boy, this little boy, who had no fear of rats. He would sit with this white rat, he would pet him, he would play with him. There was no indication that there was any issue whatsoever. And Watson set out to create a situation where little Albert would grow to be afraid of the rat. So what he started to do was associated every time Albert went to reach for the rat, a very loud noise, so loud that it would make little Albert jump. And he kept, any time little Albert went to touch the rat, let the rat sit in his lap, for example, any kind of contact whatsoever, little Albert would hear this loud noise. And it got to the point where little Albert became afraid to go anywhere near the rat, because at that point, the virtually automatic reaction that he had learned was associating the loud, scary sound with interacting with the rat.
The attitudes that children learn in the family, that starts as soon as they begin understanding their parents. And I mean, it's not just what they say, but children pick up on facial expressions. They pick up on energy before they can even communicate. So that emotional, they can be quite sensitive to just anxiety in the air at very young ages. If you grow up in a household that is unsafe, where you feel it's not stable, not constant, not consistent, you are definitely prone to see the world as a more fearful place. If there's a lot of volatility, it goes back to another theory, Erik Erikson's theory. It's a lifelong developmental theory, but the very first psychosocial crisis is trust versus mistrust. And he theorized that it happens in the first year of life, and if you don't gain the sense of trust in your world, when you're hungry, someone's going to be there. When you're crying, someone's going to comfort you. Then you'll resolve that on the continuum of mistrust. And what that means is that that's the lens through which you're going to view your world.
So there's certainly genetic or nature aspects where you can see patterns in family, personality traits that get passed along from family to family. If you are born into a family where you see, for example, your father beating your mother, a logical part of you knows that that's not okay. So even though you know it's not okay, this is what you have learned by observation. Getting back to behavioral psychology, this is what you've learned by observation is the way I deal with my anger. And the hard part for a lot of people is, when are you taught something else?
Then if you're governed by fear, you could very well make up superstitions. Pigeons do it in Skinner boxes. Skinner himself did a very interesting experiment in which he put pigeons in a Skinner box is a cage in which if the pigeon does something like peck a key, it gets a reward, and pigeons readily learn to do that.
I will try to pick out some particular pattern of behavior and make it a more frequent part of the repertoire of the bird. Right, fine. This bird has been already conditioned to eat when the magazine sounds and the light flashes.
When it came to Skinner's work, what Skinner wanted to look at was, could you use twofold, rewards and punishments? Whereas if you introduce something positive, like to a pigeon a food pellet, it would encourage the pigeon to keep pecking at the lever to get more food, and thus would continue pecking and continue pecking. So you get a behavior to increase and continue.
It's not doing anything in particular, you see, but I'm going to try to get it to do something. Suppose I shape up the behavior of making a complete turn.
If he came back after a few hours and saw half a dozen pigeons under this regime, one pigeon would be preening under its left wing, another would be turning round in circles, another would be scratching the ground, another would be wiping its head on the ground. Each pigeon had superstitiously done something, accidentally been rewarded because that's when the mechanism produced the food, and carried on doing it. And so each pigeon became a kind of maniac for doing a particular ritual, which is exactly like one tribe sacrifices a goat in order to make the rains come. Another tribe gets down on its knees and faces Mecca and prays 5 times a day, whatever it is. Each tribe develops its own superstition in order to get rewarded, and of course in order to avoid being punished, in order to avoid the fearful consequences of random events which they had no control over.
Because it's believed that for a lot of people, religion is something that people find comforting because, for example, a fear of death. Well, if there's this wonderful afterlife, I'm going to go to heaven and there's going to be all my family there, it's suddenly not so bad. So it's believed that for a lot of people, religion has become a societal way of coping with anxieties.
If you believe the way we do, then yes, you're going to come back as a more evolved being, you're going to go to heaven, you're going to have your own planet, you're going to have 40 virgins or something in your afterlife. But if you don't, then it's going to be eternal hell and damnation.
If it's something that our brain tells us is a true threat, at that point then the hypothalamus, the amygdala both kick in. The amygdala actually triggers the hypothalamus. Chemical reactions, adrenaline, cortisol are all released in the brain that then actually release an automatic physiological response that includes things like your heart rate picking up, your breathing capacity. Blood actually rushes from your digestive tract out to your external limbs to get your muscles ready. Your senses actually increase and become more aware, such as hearing, such as your vision. And at that point, you are ready to either fight or flight. Do I need to prepare myself for something that I need to respond to, or do I need to take off?
When people are afraid, it can override their cognitive abilities, and so they're not really thinking through things. They're reacting in an emotional place, a fear-based place, that amygdala place. And so their fear can be quelled somewhat by listening to someone who will say, this is the solution. This is what we all need to do. It's strange now that what the media does is play up those fears of danger, something happening to me or someone I love. And those fears are really played up in the media through the sensationalized stories that will lead the newscast.
The point is that the news media preferentially feeds us negative stories because that's what our minds pay attention to. And there's a very good reason for that. Every second of every day, our senses bring in way too much data that we can possibly process in our brains. And because nothing is more important to us than survival, the first stop of all of that data is an ancient sliver of the temporal lobe called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is our early warning detector, our danger detector. It sorts and scours through all of the information, looking for anything in the environment that might harm us. So given a dozen news stories, we will preferentially look at the negative news. And that old newspaper saying, if it bleeds, it leads, is very true.
So if we heard a newscast about a school shooting, and we remember Columbine, and we remember Virginia Tech, and we can tick off a number of things that happen over a 10-year span or longer, we overestimate the likelihood that that will occur. And so children at a very early age start picking up on their own parents' biases. And that's where you start seeing, oh, that group's not okay. We can talk about that through the lens of in-groups and out-groups as well. Through middle school on into high school, there are cliques, of course, and when you're not a member of the clique, if your clique is your in-group, the rival cliques or anyone that you're not a part of, they're going to be the out-group. When we look at bullying, it's not always just physical bullying, it's the emotional torments and the teasing. And often that can have a longer impact on an adult, not only the adolescent, but it can go on way into adulthood, the impact of being ostracized and being left out. And there is a fear for many people of not belonging, and it can be traced back to that. And for people with a very strong fear in that sense, they'll do all kinds of things in order to belong.
You could have someone with a fear of rejection where legitimately it does seem irrational, but maybe there's one person, you know, their father along the way, who nothing was good enough and rejected them. It's amazing how one experience can plant the seeds for a fear to continue.
So you might predict that they could be more likely to join a group, to conform, to feel a sense of belonging. In a weird way, it gives them a sense of meaning. They feel a sense of meaning in belonging and hating this other group and fearing this other group. If you felt like an outsider in your own family, that you want to belong to something. And so that kind of person is going to be particularly vulnerable to joining a group that might have nefarious aims.
God speaks to me. I have a message to present. You may not believe that. If you don't believe that, then believe this. See, this is my family. It may not be like your family.
How very much I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life. But in spite of all of that I've tried, a handful of our people, with their lies, have made our life impossible.
Or, in old language, a couple thousand years ago, disciples. Those who are trying to prepare themselves for entry into the evolutionary level above human, synonymous with the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
Nowadays, increasingly, we understand where danger comes from, we know where disease comes from, we don't know exactly, but approximately. We know how to control our world to an increasing extent.
I think an antivirus program for helping people to overcome their fears and think critically is simply awareness. So much like you have an antivirus program on your computer, it detects threats. And I think there's no way around a person just growing in their awareness, becoming more aware of their stereotypical thinking.
And that's often a way that behaviors such as fears get unlearned. You gotta substitute, they have to be taught another way. Until we're given something else to substitute it, we're gonna do the thing we know how to do.